Everyone, if you've just signed on, I am Erin Cunningham Ritter, and I am your host for this session. I want to welcome you all, as well as our presenters, to this session titled Creating an Inclusive UC-Denver Campus, Modeling a Network Approach for Change, which is part of the 2024 CU Boulder Disability Symposium. Like I said, my name is Erin, and I'll be the host for this session. I'm a 47-year-old white female with a long, dark ponytail and wearing a white blouse. Now I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Colleen Donnelly and Dr. Thorsten Spain for today's session. But before we get to the session, I want to share a little bit about the background of the symposium and read our land acknowledgement. The University of Colorado Boulder is hosting the Disability Symposium to acknowledge that more work must be done to improve inclusion of persons with disabilities on the Boulder campus. Efforts to improve inclusion must focus on students, staff, and faculty. The 2021 CU Boulder Campus Climate Survey Report, which was released in April of 2022, found that 44% of undergraduate students and 47% of graduate students reported experiencing incivility in the prior 12 months. For students with disabilities, these numbers climbed to 54% and 62% respectively. This symposium is a springboard to continue campus-wide conversations on how each of us can improve inclusion on campus and improve support for all persons with disabilities. As symposium organizers, we would also like to take a moment to issue the CU Boulder Land Acknowledgement. The University of Colorado Boulder, Colorado's flagship university, honors and recognizes the many contributions of Indigenous peoples in our state. CU Boulder acknowledges that it is located on the traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, and many other Native American nations. Their forced removal from these territories has caused devastating and lasting impacts. While the University of Colorado Boulder can never undo or rectify the devastation wrought on Indigenous people, we commit to improving and enhancing engagement with Indigenous peoples and issues locally and globally. We will do this by recognizing and amplifying the voices of Indigenous CU Boulder students, staff, and faculty and their work. We will do this by educating, conducting research, supporting student success, and integrating Indigenous knowledge. We will do this by consulting, engaging, and working collaboratively with tribal nations to enhance our ability to provide access and culturally sensitive support, and to recruit, retain, and graduate Native American students in a climate that is inclusive and respectful. Now it is my honor to introduce our presenters and pass things over to them, Drs. Donnelly and Spain. Dr. Spain, would you like to take it from here?
Thank you so much, Erin. I hope everybody can hear me fine. Thank you for having us, virtually that is, and for including us in your symposium. A few words perhaps about Colleen and myself in terms of the various roles that we've played in accessibility efforts. Colleen Donnelly is a professor in the English department at the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. I am an associate clinical teaching track professor in political science. But Colleen is also the chair of the Faculty Assembly Disability Committee and the lead of the Accessibility Operations Team, or Task Force as it once used to be called. I am the vice chair of the Faculty Assembly Disability Committee, and I do some other stuff too that I can't remember now for some reason. But in essence, Colleen and I have been doing this work. She has done this work longer than I have, but we have been joining forces for about 3 years. And this presentation is really about our experiences at UCDenver in terms of moving accessibility forward. And we're hoping through this presentation to provide some information for anyone who is interested in advocacy, anyone who's interested in pursuing change. So we hope also to learn from anyone who's joining us here today if you have some insights. And we encourage you to speak up. Aaron is going to monitor the chat. And if you have any thoughts, any experiences in terms of moving an agenda like accessibility, producing this major change in an institution or institutions that are generally not known for quick change, right? Then that would be very, very much appreciated. So let me dive in and basically give you a bit of an overview of what we are trying to do and what we're not trying to do here. So the purpose of this presentation, as I said, is really talk about our efforts and our challenges in regards to accessibility practices and inclusion, social inclusion on the UCDenver campus. But there are some limitations. There are quite a few offices that are engaged in accessibility changes. For instance, the Office of Information Technology, and also we have the a pedagogical division that deals with document accessibility and things like that. And that is really not the focus of this work. And our focus, Colleen and my focus really has been to promote greater inclusion and to view disability, take the definition from the medical model, away from the medical model, towards one of a social model, and to promote the well-being of all of our students, right? So that includes accessibility and digital accessibility types of practices, but it does so much more. It involves social events. It involves training in executive functioning differences. It involves raising the general awareness, for instance, by challenging ableist practices and ableist languages. And we feel that we have done quite a bit of work here that nobody else has really done at our university. And we're kind of even a bit protective about this terrain that we have taken. And we have resisted attempts by other groups and organizations to either disempower us or to sideline us, put us in some place where they think it serves them better. And again, these are all things that they would like to talk about here today. Let me start out, let me continue with the presentation overview. I'd like to talk briefly about disability at UCDenver. I have some statistics. Our vision, the vision statement of an accessible campus culture. I'd like to talk a bit about organizational change models. And as you hear from the title, we very much believe in a network model. We don't really like a hierarchical model from the top down. And we feel that that is the most effective way forward and the most respectful way forward and the most inclusive way forward. I'd like to then describe the efforts of our group and other groups that we have been part of, right? Starting with the Faculty Assembly Disability Committee, moving to the Accessibility Operations Task Force, which was created roughly 2 years ago, and then ending on the Accessibility Steering Committee that was created about Colleen, what is it, 7-8 months ago, right? Yeah. Something like that. And to end the presentation, I couldn't resist, putting a little theory in and basically using organizational change theory to address the things that we've done and potentially also give the audience an opportunity to look at things that we could do better at. So let me start with some statistics. You can see on the left and on the right of the slide, there's data on the left from the Campus and Workplace Culture Survey from 2021, and on the right, data from the campus and the same survey, right? So you see here very telling that we have many students who have some kind of a disability, reporting obviously underreporting to DRS. And in private reporting, much higher numbers. The same thing goes for employees. Colleen, quickly, what was the number that we had for faculty reporting?
Yeah, UCDenver in the past 2 years has only had 48 employees who have received accommodations. And we know that has to do in part with stigma, discrimination, etc. We also know from this data that we have here, this is like your campus survey. So this is self-reporting. We believe that at all campuses, about a third of students probably have disabilities. Um, Faculty, employees, it should be probably around 15 to 20%, not under 1% that we have. But we are also very conscientious about people who do not receive accommodations from DRS or ADA, that there are a large number of people with disabilities who self-accommodate, or who don't receive accommodations because of cultural reasons, financial reasons, whatever. And also the fact that a majority of our students and our employees on university campuses have hidden disabilities rather than the ones that people oftentimes see, which makes things more complicated as well. So just to give a bigger, broader picture of what disability looks like really in the whole CU system, because I've also worked with the system as well.
Yeah, that's one of the hats that I forgot to mention,
Yeah.
that Colleen does work at the system level. And the numbers on the right, the bar graph, very clearly confirm Colleen's point, right? See, 74% reporting chronic mental health conditions. Second largest number is learning disabilities. And you notice that very small numbers really are, if you will, the kind of typical view of disability, either a physical or mobility related kind of a disability, right? So that a lot of these disabilities are just not being seen and they're not being assessed through the proper means. Our vision of an accessible campus is based on the following 4 points. We would like to build on ADA compliance and accommodations as a foundation, and then move beyond that to move towards a fully accessible campus that includes accessible pedagogical practices in our classes and the full inclusion of all students, faculty, and staff. We would like to reach all individuals, including those with hidden disabilities, the neurodiverse, those who self-accommodate, and those who do not seek accommodations due to stigma, fear of discrimination, cultural, family, and community biases. Accommodations are not equal to accessibility. Accessibility is equity and benefits all members of the community, not just the disabled, by providing multiple modalities for education, exchange, and engagement. So a point that you will hear us making repeatedly is that accessibility is good for everyone. Our students learn in different ways and sometimes simultaneously, perhaps too much so, as we know, as we teach in the classroom, and we tell them to get off their phones and stuff like that, right? But it is what it is. People are learning in very unique ways, and making things more accessible simply accommodates the way in which our society is evolving. Models for accessibility.
I just add one,
Yes.
I just want to add one thing there. I think that people who work in accessibility now agree, so I may be talking to the choir, but the one thing we want to make very clear is that compliance is not accessibility, that basic compliance is the floor. That when we talk about accessibility, and this is, again, that's also part of the social model, and a social responsibility, that accessibility does mean accessibility to all without having to identify and ask for accommodations, etc. It's creating and promoting an open and inclusive culture. It's built on top of that very basic requirement for compliance.
Why don't I take a little bit of a break at the end of every slide in case there are questions, or in case you would like to chime in, Colleen, okay? So as we were looking at best practices in institutions of higher education, we used the Faculty Assembly Disability Committee to review over 50 schools in higher education. And these were good schools. These were schools that had something to them. And we were looking for an accessibility change model something that we could support, and something that we could write a report on and then present that to higher leadership, administrative leadership. And we found that in quite a few places, there is what we consider to be an older top-down hierarchical model, where a single leader, some kind of a chancellor or vice chancellor, or an enlarged DRS office initiates changes. But we thought that when we looked at the details, that oftentimes these types of hierarchical models tended to be very much compliance-based. It was like, are you doing the accommodations? You know, is everything ADA compliant, right? What was not so much part of that hierarchical change model was pedagogical changes, awareness campaigns, right? You know, changing people's culture, changing the culture on campus. Physical, psychological, and social inclusion goals, right? These didn't seem to be that well addressed in that kind of a model. Another problem that we saw was that there are silos that emerge, where some parts of the campus move ahead very quickly and others don't, and then there's no coordination in terms of approaches and standards. And part of that, we thought, was because institutions of higher education are not corporations. You can't just do whatever you want to do. You need to convince people, you need to bring them on board, right? And there are so many co-governance structures built in, faculty assembly, right? But even at lower levels, there are so many stakeholders who need to be considered, that a hierarchical model is most likely going to inhibit a holistic approach to establishing an inclusive and forward-moving campus. So here in a nutshell are some of the things that we thought the hierarchical model really does produce as a problem. That nobody really sees the whole picture, because the individual silos develop their own kind of approaches to what they should be doing. There are redundancies and gaps. There might be amazing localized expertise, but it doesn't translate into shared knowledge and practices. Right? So one organization, one center, one primary unit might do very well, others will not. Right? Another problem is the lack of sustainability, because basically the people that pursue these efforts, they show up and eventually they fade from the scene. Right? And there is no joint responsibility at a broader level. There's just basically individual responsibility in certain areas of the university. Not a bad thing for those areas, perhaps, right? But overall, we're not achieving what we're trying to achieve, which is an inclusive, welcoming campus. Questions on this slide? Colleen, anything you'd like to add?
Let's just say that this is the traditional model. When we were doing this investigation, Thorsten and I also went to the Ahead Higher Ground conference and listened to, so we've had in-person exposure as well. We literally went and looked for best practices, schools with best practices, which tend to be those with disability cultural centers, which we'll get into more on the next slide. But so this was after doing a lot of research with the faculty disability group, that we really tried to go through and see what's the old model and what is projected as being the best ways to move forward.
So we really came down to the network model as being a superior type of model, especially as we're trying to achieve fundamental, long-lasting, and a comprehensive change. Right? It's a newer model. It is utilized by many schools in accessibility practices. We have a horizontal distribution of authority and responsibility, and we're bringing individuals, units, and institutions together on the basis of a common vision of change and a desire for change. We're bringing them together to share their research, their practical expertise. And this allows for more inclusion of people with, lived experience and who advocate for and within the disability community. And for those people to be part of the decision-making process. One thing that seems to us is very important in this network model is an empowered operational team, some sort of a center in which all shareholders can be represented and in which expertise in disability and accessibility can be shared, so that best practices can be shared and constantly be innovated in that kind of a forum. This committee, whatever you wanted to call it, a team, would oversee a holistic approach, coordinate programs, provide expertise and guidance, assess progress, and adapt to changing needs of the community. And the advantages of this model, the network model, would be that localized knowledge can be utilized as needed, and best practices can readily be shared. As meetings take place and people are finding out, okay, here is one primary unit that's pioneered something, that's really working well. Let's try to introduce this in other places as well. It's a bit like, if you will, federalism, right? Where policy learning can take place. Sorry, political scientists coming out. Policy learning can take place in one state and then can be applied in other states, right? This is a more sustainable kind of a system too, that it outlasts individuals. We have different stakeholders, but they're really conceptualized not so much as individuals and more really as particular organizations, centers, or units, whatever you want to call it. Basically, the entirety of the university, right? We can recognize gaps and redundancies more easily and address them. Accessibility is no longer viewed as solely as addressing individual needs, but it becomes more of a shared community goal. People will develop pride. Like, I can share that I've developed a sense of pride participating in the work that I've done with Colleen over the last, and others over the last 3 years. There's a shared responsibility here. Again, the hierarchical approach, it's always easy to say, oh, it's up to the vice chancellor for accessibility or disability or whatnot, right? In this network approach, everybody's responsible. And at the University of Colorado, Denver, we have a 2030 strategic plan, which pursues goals of an inclusive and equitable campus. And so that is in line with that plan as well, too, right? It empowers multiple and diverse stakeholders, including faculty, students, staff, and the wider community. And it's, like I said, it's part of making University of Colorado, Denver, the best place to work, and all these other goals that we have. Thoughts, Colleen?
Go ahead.
And here's an example of the network, right? And you notice that we have pretty much, and I'm sure we don't have everybody in this network yet, but we have HR, right? The Learning Resources Center is probably a little small for people to really read this. I am the Assistant Director of the Center for Faculty Development and Advancement, and we've done some training through that center. The Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning, Facilities, OIT, right? I'm not going to go through everything here, but here's the library, the Center for Inclusive Teaching, Legal Counsel, Student Government, Staff Council, and also Faculty Assembly. So just an example of mapping the network, right? So our recommendation on the basis of what we found was really to utilize a horizontal model that is based on a steering committee that has the power to bring people together. And this is, again, not supposed to be a steering committee that it's supposed to advise, right? It's not supposed to tell. It's not supposed to order. It's supposed to advise. It should be there permanently, an evergreen committee. It should be staffed by faculty, staff, student representatives, and members and advocates of the disability community. It should regularly coordinate with satellite units and programs, and also report to administration. It should keep informed and collect best practices, inform of best practices, and also implement community-wide programs and events. So again, getting away from the silos, getting towards a university-wide, campus-wide effort. Regular consultations with satellite units, right? That would be a part of this as well. One of the things that we saw as potential obstacles, and as it turns out, this did come to pass, is that upper administration is not always willing to accommodate horizontal models. And that could be either due to, the fact that they don't see them as effective, or it might have something to do with standard operating procedures, right? That there might be a disagreement in how things, or particularly change, should be engineered. Also, one of the things that we anticipated and also did happen is that there could be organizational turf wars. In other words, people's careers are interwoven with central goals of the university. And that includes, at this point, accessibility practices, right? It is very possible, and it has definitely happened, so that some people would like to have a larger piece, if you will, of that accessibility change, cake, right? And they don't like it when they're being told by others that they need to play ball. So those are things that we anticipated, and actually they did happen. Just briefly, in terms of our findings about accessibility best practices in institutions of higher education. Digital accessibility. I'm just going to fly through these a bit, because I'm sure as was said earlier, we're teaching to the choir here. Accessible class materials and teaching in multiple modalities. UDL, faculty training and support for developing accessible practices. Diminishing ableist practices across campus. All right, re-educating the community as a whole, and implementing strategies to fight stigma. Recognition that accessibility practices profit all students. As I mentioned earlier, international students, Gen Z, neurodiverse students. It helps with the retention of students, right? And again, in addition to all of that, which seems is very important, let's not neglect the social component, the activities, clubs, engagements, peer groups, concerts, what have you, right? Workshops for students to achieve success in areas such as executive functioning. We are actually working on some of those. Methods for addressing impediments to accessibility beyond reporting to DRS and ADA. For instance, streamlining the processes, right? Using feedback, user focus groups, and monitored accountability of services. Ultimately, all of this culminating in a disability cultural center, right? The best practices that we found had that kind of a center. It wasn't always the most amazing center, but there was a center, there was a space, right? A dedicated space beyond DRS for receiving accommodations that recognizes disability as an identity, accessibility staff and programs implementing a socially inclusive model of disability. Again, sometimes these were large facilities, sometimes they were part of student government, right? They were housed in a place like the Tivoli, or could be housed in a place like the Tivoli.
Or for those of us familiar with the Boulder campus, the UMC.
Right. Let me now turn a bit into greater detail in terms of the process of change and the various actors that Colleen and I worked in, right? And the actors that really present the information and the experience that we're trying to communicate to you today. The first one is the Faculty Assembly Disability Committee. And it basically engaged in a number of projects, including a climate survey. And I believe that was the first one ever, right, Colleen?
The first that was done for disability, yes.
A disability climate survey. Yeah, I meant to fix that. And we had a symposium. It was a Zoom symposium, but it was very well attended. I forget how many people we had, but it was a lot.
250.
150, right?
250.
250.
Yeah, it was the one that was on social justice and in intersectionality. David knows what, yeah, 2 years ago.
Right, awareness campaigns, pedagogical tools on the website, and it also engaged in that best practices report that I provided a little bit earlier, right? The best practices in institutions of higher education. And then in 2022, a number of operations task forces were created through the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And one of them was the Accessibility Operations Task Force, which was composed and does still exist, is composed of students, faculty, and staff. It commenced with a charge and took about a year to submit a final report, which was a report then submitted in 2023, report that made recommendations about change and also instructed or provided some findings. For instance, one of the things that we found out very quickly from our students was that they did not feel welcome. Students with disabilities did not feel welcome, right? And that had to go into this report. And other things that were in this report, and Colleen, maybe chime in if you like, is that we really wanted to create more of a community, a disability community, based on a series of events, plus training for faculty, and general awareness, stuff like that. That as a result of that final report, the accessibility operations team received money, right? 30,000, I believe we got, right? And with that money, we launched a number of projects. We had a concert by the band Wheelchair Sports Camp, and we had the Chancellor Show and a number of other people. We had accessibility training and offered a certificate through my center, the CFDA. We funded an ally ambassador program, meaning we had people who went to departments and primary units and acquainted them with how Ally for Blackboard was working. We established links with your campus, the UC Boulder Digital Accessibility Office. Mike came and presented with his team, was awesome, right? We also established links with the Denver Academy, which is a special school for neurodiverse children, up to K-12, I believe. And wonderful people there. Philippe Ernowine came to present on executive functioning for a full day, 8 hours actually. And what was surprising was that we had quite a few people and they stayed the whole day, right, on a Friday, which, as you know, is not always something that is something we can achieve. We did encounter challenges. One major one was procurement. We did not have a speed type, and nothing works without a speed type. We had to basically the team had to figure out how to partner with somebody who had a speed type. Sometimes that was the CFDA, and it was actually mostly the CFDA, right? We used other speed types as well. The point, though, in all of this is that we didn't have a central ledger where we could really see where all the costs, where the monies were going, and when we were asking the various offices with their speed types for an account of how things were working and what had been moved, it was sometimes difficult to get a whole picture of what was going on. The second problem was student involvement, and we attribute that to the fact that we have a commuter campus, right, an urban campus in which a lot of students come in and go out, right, and it's just difficult to like get them involved in something, especially like in an organizational challenge like this. Another third problem was recognition. We encountered pushback by other centers and organizations that basically didn't take us seriously. Basically, who are you? And Colleen and I talked about the fact maybe we should make up some titles. Maybe that would move us forward a bit. It's like when they see the wizard of, I don't know, it's like, who knows how they come up with these university titles sometimes, but something that would give us more gravitas, right? That where we would be able to, for instance, I remember we wanted to get student government on board, and it took forever for them to reply to our emails, right? One of the things that Colleen and I decided to do here, this is a bit touchy, right? Because this is a work in progress. We're never going to mention names here, right? But I think it's fair to, for the sake of providing a complete and honest narrative, to talk about some of these challenges and also to mention some of these organizations. And it's nothing personal and nothing against particular organizations, but it is what it was what it was, right? In the sense that we did encounter some issues with not necessarily being recognized in the way that we should be recognized. Another thing that was not recognized is that that we were faculty and students, right, and staff. We were basically working, and really, we're the backbone of the university, right? This effort is not an administrative effort, and this, I'm not trying to critique administration. We need administration, but this is really an effort that was produced by people who had a lot at stake and really cared deeply about the things that they advocated. And as I said, they are basically the main part of the university, and then to not receive that recognition, particularly Article 5 of Regents Law, which stipulates that that faculty is in charge of all pedagogy, right? We felt disrespected at times. We felt like people were listening to bigger titles more than to us. If that makes sense.
There's a problem with, we don't have titles, and we also find our work is showing up in other places. Like facilities took all of our stuff and presented it to regions and never said that it was our work that we had done, like the first disability survey and all the changes we made on campus. That continually happens because we are titleless. We're not administrators, so to speak. I just want to say a couple more things at this one right here about the DEI Operations Task Force. Two other things that are really important. Heather Albanonzi, who's at UCCS, and I had worked together, and we tried to create a disability committee on faculty council. And we found it did not work well at all. That most of the work that in fact happens in terms of disability and accessibility is campus by campus. We have found, particularly in the past 2 years, Thorsten can speak to this too, that doing work not through that, again, administrative structure of faculty council, but like partnerships. We have a wonderful partnership right now with your guys' digital office, and we do more socials, some other things, and we trade back and forth. So we have found that those kinds of connections are serving us really well. And the thing about, so when, as I said, that it didn't work at the council level and we came back to the school level, that's when we tried to get this AOT group doing. The power of the AOT group, from faculty assembly to the one that Thorsten will do next, is what it allowed us to do is to bring staff and students in. Because faculty disability committee is just that, faculty disability. The steering committee is something central admin is trying to create and is representative of units and is almost all central admins, people with titles, not necessarily people with training. UCDenver is a rough school in that way, that they have a tendency to hire people and give them 20% positions and things that they don't necessarily know a whole lot about. But that's their title. So what happened with the AOT team is we brought together people who are committed, who have expertise, who represent those stakeholders. 2/3 of that committee is people who have disabilities. So trying to get outside of quote unquote the titled units of central admin to create something that works. And that group has done an enormous amount of work in the past few years, the things that Thorsten's mentioned so far and more that we're doing. And of course, the problem is that what we have now is an issue where other people want to usurp their work or don't want to recognize that work or want to make it under central admin, because there is a belief from people who are tied to the old IHE model that the only way that you keep things sustainable, and their argument is accountable, is if people that are at the head of central admin are responsible. Somehow those of us who have been faculty, and I've been a faculty at UCDenver for 38 years, aren't seen as sustainable members of the community versus central admin, which I find a little bit humorous. But go ahead, Thorsten.
Yeah, especially since many administrators just don't stay long in their positions anymore, right? They seem to transfer in and out.
Yeah, 3 to 5 years is the average, it seems.
And that produces additional problems. So at the end of our first year as an operational team that engaged in a number of programming efforts and events, a suggestion was made to empower this committee further. I believe that was the original argument, by creating an accessibility steering committee that included pretty much all of the very high-ranking administrative people, including from OIT, from legal counsel, and a wide range of other areas. But it was all, as Colleen said earlier, all administrators. In fact, Colleen and I were the only faculty on that team, and there were no students and there was no staff represented. And that has severely compromised the way in which that steering committee has been viewed in the last 3-4 months, right? So we don't actually know what is going to happen to this committee. So far, it has really not done anything. It was supposed to empower the AOT, but then try to subsume the AOT in basically the suggestion was made to split the AOT into a component that focused on pedagogy and another one that would focus on social inclusion, and that would sit alongside OIT, the digital accessibility piece, and other pieces, right? But in essence, it wasn't going to be designed as an empowering vehicle, more of really another hierarchical model that was going to take all of these efforts and all of these recommendations from the AOT, I'm sorry, and basically do the things that administrators do, which is to basically take the information that has been created and then control it in some way, and control those who presented these reports. And so there's perhaps I can end on this in terms of describing the evolution of this process. There is now, in Colleen and I, and the things that we control, we're turning to faculty assembly as a way to preserve our independence and to continue to work in the way that we feel we must work in order to pursue accessibility on the campus. So I want to end on organizational change theory, and as I mentioned earlier, would really appreciate any type of comments that the audience here has, and help us reconfigure, if you will, our approach to change. Now that I've described a bit of what has happened, and what programming has been done. And that maybe I should say one final thing. So the where are we now? Well, I think we're somewhat deadlocked, right? We have accessible, digital accessibility moving forward as much as they can, right? But of course, they're dealing with, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of documents, right? That goes through OIT. Then there is an effort through Ally. But I'm not going to get Colleen started on Ally because we're never going to hear the end of it.
Let's just say that we now prefer we work with the Boulder model. Our TIPS office uses Ally, which is not considered best practices. We work with the Washington Boulder models that are best practices. It's one of the things that sets us apart from the central admin model. We are very much trying to use what we have, teased out, researched with a group of experts and advocates at our school that have been defined as best practices. We really try to turn to that.
And we have learned that a lot of faculty are very hesitant to use Ally. They resent it. Some of them resent it. There is the issue of some faculty members saying that, why should I do this? Why should I, make my courses compliant? And as we have been pointing out, well, if you are not making them compliant, somebody else might, and it is ultimately your course. Wouldn't you be interested in fixing your own course and retain control over your course, right? So there are all these issues that have come up, but perhaps the most damning one when it comes to Ally is that, we have some statistics on how many thousands of fixes have been done since the program has been added to all the Canvas shells. And all these fixes have moved the general needle by a tiny fraction.
6,000 fixes moved it 0.1%. So it would take 500,000 fixes to get it from 61 to 72%. And as Mike can tell you from your own office, it's also not reliable. There's a lot of ways around it. It's highly problematic. What I would like to focus on here for a second to shift from there a little bit is let's shift the word right here. It's not an issue of compliance. It's an issue of accessibility. And when we're talking about accessibility here, the issue is that when you make your class materials accessible, again, the Gen Z students, the neurodiverse students, the students that learn in different ways, what we're actually doing is increasing our retention and our graduation rates of our students. So one of the things that, because I've been doing disability advocacy work now for about a decade, is the proposal I make to sell accessibility to administrators and to people across campuses and system-wide. I've worked on the state committee, is that this is such benefit to so many other people, and that the neurodiversity and that of our students is increasing so much, and that accessibility sits in the foreground of how to address those needs of many, many, many of those students. So it gives us a way in, a viable way into new methods of teaching and increasing our success in doing so. So it's not just about disabled students, though obviously they matter immensely to everybody who's here, but it is something that helps all of our students.
Yeah, that's always been our pitch, right? And yet change is difficult, right? According to a number of studies, about 70% of organizational change efforts fail. Right, and as a result of that, there's no shortage of change theories. There's a classic model by Levin from 1947, unfreezing, transitioning, and refreezing the institutional changes. And what models have done since that time is, I think, just simply break down these three larger phases. And the model that I would like to propose and then apply to the changes that we have tried to initiate at UCDenver is one by Jick from 1993 with 10 stages. Right, it starts with the need to analyze the need for change, moves to creating a shared vision. You need to separate from the past, create a sense of urgency, support a strong leader role. And when I say leader role, I don't mean authoritarian system or hierarchical model like what we had earlier, but they have to be strong leaders in the system. They have to be dedicated individuals, right? You have to line up political sponsorship. You need to establish an implementation plan, develop enabling structures, communicate and involve people, and then ultimately reinforce and institutionalize change. So now let me apply that to our situation at UCDenver, right? If we're looking at analyzing the need for change, I think a lot of this came from the Faculty Disability Committee. It did not come from DRS, right, which was very much based on compliance for years. The leadership there has changed. And so DRS has actually also become a leader now. I'll talk about that later. But before then, it really wasn't, right? I mentioned that first disability survey, or Colleen mentioned that, right? Before my time, there was the AHEAD visit. There were North Classroom accessibility issues that were fixed. Fast team reconstruction. Colleen can talk about any one of these if she likes. Right, so there was a lot of sort of initiation coming from that committee, and a lot of fighting. Colleen, you had a lot of issues, right? You really had to slug it out, as they say.
Yeah, we had DRS was totally against us doing any work. They said it was their area. Plus, the AHEAD report that UCDenver got was so bad that it has been suppressed and never released. You can only get a hold of the executive report. That's why when Thorsten's staying, we have a new person who's been in for a year, but there was, to say that there was resistance to faculty discom doing work on disability is an understatement. People were attacked, there was pushback and undermining that went on. But despite that, we got a lot of that done. Let me mention just for a second, for those of you who don't know FAST, because a lot of the things we talk about are about students, FAST is a team that the university has that responds to faculty in crisis, behavioral and mental crises. And at the time that this was happening, that was basically meant that 2 police officers from campus and somebody else came and hauled a person off to Denver General. And we talked about the fact that that was inappropriate, that they weren't trained in trauma, that they weren't trained in NASBITA policies and that. So one of the most important things we did, and they had nobody who was actually advocating for them or anything. So one of the most important things we did in that first year of the work we did was got that FAST team changed, that there had to be training, that who constituted it, the advocacy for faculty or staff members. So the other thing is we always put students central, but we also know that UCDenver, and I just read the article that came out of Boulder too, that there are huge problems with ADA for staff and faculty at the university as well. So this is one of the most important things we've done in terms of trying to address those issues that also apply to employees too, and we do care about the employees as well as the students.
Yeah, Colleen and I had been scheming on how to get into the chancellor's office to get that report, because we think it's somewhere in there, right?
Oh, I've read it. I know where it is. And I'm one of there's only about 5 of us at the time who had access to it. So I know how bad it is because I've read it, but it's, yeah, I know where it is, but yeah, they're not going to let it out.
So the need for change, that would be stage 1 in the transition, right? Create a shared vision. I mentioned the vision earlier. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Colleen, did the Faculty Assembly Disability Committee create a vision? Probably at some point, right?
Well, one of the differences we have from central admin, let's be really honest about this, Thorsten, because this is something that I think is really interesting for people who work on disability work. Central admin and the ACS is really stalled. They can't get started. They've had 8 meetings or 8 months of like, this is the structure we're going to have and what are going to be our policies for how we run. They try and send people to the AOT. Let's set up your policies for how you're going to. And we're like, no, that's not how we work. We're faculty. What we do is we decide these are things we want to accomplish. We want to have a disability survey. We want to change the FAST team. We want to offer training. So instead of spending months setting up structures under who to work with and who's in charge and all that. We basically are pragmatic, and our progress we look towards what's the end point of what is our goal, what is the thing that we want to produce. And so I would say that it's not so much we chose projects that we wanted to concentrate on. That's how DISCOM and AOT has worked, instead of this, yes, we have a charge and a mission statement beyond that each year at the beginning of each semester, where it's like, what are the things that we want to accomplish this year? And how do we accomplish them? So it's always the project, the end services that we concentrate on, rather than what is our membership structure and the rules under which we work. And that means we've gotten a lot done in the years that we've developed. There was an article last year called The Accessible Friendly University about UCDenver. All of the things that are in there are basically from the DISCOM and the AOT team.
One thing that occurred to me the other day, and Colleen, maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like we operate like SpaceX, whereas the administration operates more like NASA. They sit there forever trying to figure out how to do things. We, when we did that certificate in accessibility practices, we jumped in. We didn't know what we were going to get. Maybe something was going to blow up. Maybe nobody was going to sign up. That would have been bad for me as assistant director. It turns out it wasn't that great for me anyways, because I didn't get enough support for these efforts. But yeah, we blow things up and learn in the process, right? And our goal is to get things done and to get noticed and to get this issue noticed, instead of sitting
the
there
notice
forever
we
and
get
planning.
is exactly the problem, because what Thorsten's describing is where the clash happens. I know, Thorsten knows, I've been at UCDenver for 38 years. I know that we can have certificates. We were offering it, and one of those administrative units said, you can't offer a certificate, and tried to stop us for 2 months. And finally, it got to them, no, they can offer certificates. That's the university rules. We've designed posters, logos. They'll say, you can't do that. They don't meet the branding standards. Like, yes, they do, and they're student produced. So we have constantly in the past year, it's not our work that we get stymied by these units that have turf and silos that want to have this ownership in it. And that, quite honestly, is our biggest problem right now. Either, as I said, they're sitting there, they're still not doing anything, and we're trying to do the work, and they're trying to decide how does the structure work. But there's also been this issue of impeding the work we're doing because they want it, because now it's, accessibility is valuable turf now in universities.
So point 3, moving along.
We do have a hand raised, and I wonder if it's relevant to this content. And I just want to point out, we've got about 1 more minute left, so I want to be mindful of everyone's time, but perhaps we could keep you for an additional 5 minutes if that works for you. Okay, cool. So Eva, it looks like you're up.
Hi, I'm an academic advisor at CU Boulder, trying to help students get better access and all that kind of thing. And I'm trying to go back to your model, and it seems like, and you're using your acronyms here, that AOT was working, and when it went to the ASC, it's become crap. And so what's the possibility of getting the 2 or 3 administrators or people who have power into the AOT instead of handing it off to a bunch of people that stalled everything?
The problem is,
you said you wanted ideas. There's my idea.
The issue is it went the other way, because they had said build the AOT, but now they want it back. They want
to say no. That's what I'm saying. I'm like, can you just say no? Like, look, you've done nothing for a year and a half.
Yeah. Well,
why don't we get one person who has some power? Again, I mean, I'm just, like I said, I'm just ideating here.
No, the one person who because you guys know we're looking for a new chancellor. It's a problem. What we've tried to do, quite honestly, is, and this is also talking to the Boulder Disability Group, because we don't have a disability office like you do that just does, the informational processing. what we're trying to do is to tell them, you guys go ahead and do your, the disabilities information, the digital side, but let the faculty, let's divide up. Because the problem is that, yeah, OIT and IT does that really well, does websites. That's what they're trained in. But all of these other things that have to do with student success and that kind of thing, like our students constantly want executive functioning help. DRS is not trained in that. But we have faculty that are building this up. We've built a cohort. We've worked with Denver Academy. So what we're trying right now is to actually find a way to push the horizontal model, even though they don't want it, by splitting off and saying, give us control over, as Thorsten mentioned, the Article 5 stuff, the pedagogy, the student staff inclusion. We're stuck right now. I can't tell you what will happen with that, Eva, but that's exactly where the problem exists, is that issue of, the admin wants to do it one way and they, we're suddenly not of value to them. They want to take this over. We're still trying to do our work. One of the powers of the AOT, and the reason we did it, is we got money. Faculty don't have money. Faculty assemblies don't have money. And the AOT was given $30,000, which for somebody like me, I can do a whole lot with $30,000. I can do a ton of trainings and stuff. So one of the issues of having that group was to not only have the different stakeholders, but to have a fund of money to work with. And the administration is not willing to give that kind of control over to other people unless it's done by a VC. And the VCs we have want everything they want it in that upper level. They want the 5 top, VCs in these areas to be controlling everything. Their argument is it makes it accountable and sustainable. They don't seem to be very willing to listen to other arguments about that.
So to a very substantial degree, we are dealing with an institutional problem, right? That we have people in charge who rely on faculty, or at the very least need to have faculty on board for their initiatives. And yet they're kind of running things driven from their own models, right? Based on their own administrative models, which may or may not be better. I don't know. It seems to me that organizational models tend to evolve quite a bit over time, right? Perhaps more so than research in our fields. But we definitely have a bit of a disconnect between people who can make important decisions, powerful decisions, and yet need to consider others and have them do work for them, right?
Yeah, lack of empowerment is a huge issue for doing this accessibility work, at least for our school. If you don't have a title, people just don't want to listen to you. And I mean
Karen,
a high title.
How much more time do we have?
We're about 3 minutes over. So if we could take the next 2 minutes just to wrap up, I think we'll be in good shape.
Okay, then I'll just take everyone through the remaining stages of the change process. Number 4, sense of urgency. UCDenver received an F on the Johns Hopkins University Accessibility Report, right? We were not the only ones. It was generally not a good showing for universities, but it also, some people or some institutions like here, the University of Alabama at Birmingham actually got a B. So that created a sense of urgency, right? There's a growing awareness that disability is an identity and part of DEI efforts. There is a growing criticism of the medical model. We have large numbers of students, staff, and faculty who have a disability. And of course, there is the fear of lawsuits, right? As we have these House bills. In terms of a strong leadership role, I think the Faculty Assembly Disability Committee has been really, really powerful here. We also had Vice Chancellor for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, who was very supportive of our efforts. Even though we didn't always see eye to eye with him, he generally also provided us with a lot of power, plus this money that Colleen was talking about, to do these things, right? We have new leadership at DRS, which has finally, moved away from the compliance model. In terms of lining up political sponsorship, back to the wagon wheel earlier, there are all of these stakeholders, all of these actors that the AOT is trying to draw together, and hopefully we will, do this through faculty assembly as well. The one thing that we don't have is a general implementation plan. We just have piecemeal efforts to raise awareness, to increase programming, and maybe that's what it's always going to be, right? But it would be nice to have, like I mentioned earlier, some kind of a coordinating group, like some sort of a evergreen committee that brings everything together and maintains a certain overview of what is actually happening in the different places. Developing an enabling structure. The ASC was supposed to be that, but as we have pointed out to you, it's not that, right? And I'll share this. I know we don't have time, but the state of where we are right now is team building. To not offend anyone when we say something. So for Colleen and I, who have been doing all this other work, this is sort of like excruciatingly slow. It's like, okay, when are we actually going? Oh, the next thing on the menu is procedures, voting procedures and stuff. And I'm like, okay, like we actually want to do something, right? It's 9, communicate and involve people. Yes, we have been trying to do that, including UC Boulder, right? We grab people wherever we can. We work with everybody and we respect everybody. And then to reinforce an institutional change that is just still off, right? I don't even know what to say. We're definitely not in that phase yet. So that basically brings us to a conclusion. And if there are any questions, there's also a post presentation survey.
Well, I want to take this time to do a huge bow of gratitude to Doctors Donnelly and Spain from our partners at UCDenver. Your experience, your insights, and the progress you've made really gives us here a lot at Boulder and at other institutions, a lot to think about, and we are very grateful. Let's see if there's any. Let's all give our presenters a little love in the chat, and I'll be looking for last questions, but otherwise we'll be mindful of time and be ready to wrap things up. But I do want to recognize that a lot of thank yous are coming in. So we are grateful for the partnership and we'll hope to build out more connective tissue as we continue this work.
And
Thank
Erin,
you for having us.
Yes, what you see on that last slide, these are posters that our students did that we are generating as an educational campaign on UCDenver.
Cool.
System also has the one on accessibility. We are happy to share. Mike has them at the Boulder Center too. We are happy to share this kind of information throughout the system because we're trying to get the word out. So if anybody's interested in these kinds of things, please reach out to us. We'd be happy to share more with you.
Those look awesome. Thank you so much for that kind offer. And again, thank you so much for partnering with us. We've got great sessions for the rest of the week. So check out the website and we still have some room for RSVPs. So with that being said, we'll sign off for the day. Thanks to all of our participants and presenters for joining us.
Thank you, Erin.
Thank you
all for being here.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.